When police detained the black teenager, they had no idea that his mother was the district attorney, prepared to unleash the full force of the law on those who had harmed her son. What followed would shock even the most hardened, but let's start from the beginning. Marcus Williams, a tall black teenager looking tired after a long school day, was walking home through the park. His headphones drowned out the surrounding noise, so he didn't hear the slow approach of a patrol car. Suddenly, blinding headlights forced him to stop in his tracks and remove his headphones. The car came to an abrupt halt, and two police officers stepped out. "Hey kid, come over here!" barked the first officer, a tall, stocky man with a displeased expression. Marcus froze for a moment, but quickly collected himself and approached, trying to understand what was happening. "ID," the officer demanded coldly. Though confused, Marcus didn't ask any questions and silently pulled out his student ID, handing it over. The officer took it with an expression that made it clear he suspected Marcus of something criminal. "What's the problem? Did I do something wrong?" Marcus tried to keep his voice calm, though he felt anxiety rising within him. The officer looked mockingly at the ID, then nodded toward Marcus's backpack. "What's in there?" he demanded. "Open it." Marcus hesitated. He realized he was being viewed as a suspect, but decided to comply, hoping it would end this unsettling encounter quickly. Yet a nagging voice inside told him something was very wrong. Finally, he reached for the zipper on his backpack, but his hand paused. He took out his phone and calmly began recording, saying, "This is for my safety." "You think this is a joke?" The officer's tone turned threatening. The second officer, standing a bit further away, watched in silence, his face grim, as though ready to intervene if Marcus resisted. The first officer stepped forward, snatched the phone from Marcus's hand, and violently threw it to the ground, where it landed with a loud crack, the screen shattering. Stunned, Marcus staggered back, but before he could say anything, the officer roughly grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're under arrest for resisting and non-compliance," he shouted, his voice like a sentence. Marcus tried to explain he had done nothing wrong, that he was just heading home, but the officer acted as if he couldn't hear him. The second officer silently helped hold Marcus down as he was handcuffed. By this time, a crowd had gathered, people pulling out their phones to record the scene. One nearby bystander protested, "Hey, he's just a kid! What are you doing?" But the officers ignored the outcry, continuing with their actions. "Shut up and don't interfere!" barked the officer at the crowd, causing a few people to step back, though they continued recording, whispering among themselves that the teenager had done nothing wrong. Despair filled Marcus's eyes as he realized he was up against the full force of the system. The officers, seemingly deaf to both Marcus and the crowd, shoved him into the car's back seat. Marcus felt alone, powerless, and humiliated. Jennifer Williams, a seasoned prosecutor and fierce defender of justice, was finishing paperwork in her office when a message popped up on her phone. "Have you seen this video?" Unaware of the gravity of the situation, she clicked the link, instantly confronted with footage of police officers roughing up a black teenager in handcuffs. At first, she didn't recognize him, but then her heart sank. This was her son, Marcus. Shock and horror struck her. She immediately rose, grabbed her keys, and left the office, wasting no time. On the way, she called several lawyers and colleagues, demanding full support and legal intervention. For her, this was not just a case. This was her son, her family. Arriving at the police station, Jennifer stormed in with an icy expression, demanding to see the duty officer. Her demands were met with hesitation. Officers, unaware of her identity, attempted to brush her off, saying that access to the detainee is restricted. But Jennifer was not one to give up easily. "Do you even know who I am? I'm the district attorney, and you're violating the law." Her voice was sharp, her eyes blazing with anger. The officers exchanged glances, realizing the situation was taking a serious turn. Finally, the senior officer approached her, but tried to maintain a formal and stern tone. "Ma'am, your son was arrested for resisting and failing to comply with police orders." Barely able to contain herself, Jennifer leaned in close and said, "My son was arrested without cause, and you have no legal grounds to hold him. Let me see him immediately." Meanwhile, news crews began arriving, alerted by social media to the controversial arrest. Cameras recorded Jennifer's every move and word. Realizing they couldn't avoid public attention, the officers finally brought Marcus to her. The boy looked subdued, but hope flickered in his eyes as he saw his mother. She embraced him tightly, then turned to the officers, demanding an explanation. Calls began flooding the station, as the incident was already making headlines, forcing the police chief to meet with Jennifer. Reluctantly, he agreed to a private discussion in his office, but tried to defend his officers' actions, claiming they had followed protocol. Jennifer, resolute, warned him, "If you don't start acting within the law and release my son, I'll raise questions about your competence and launch an investigation into your detainment practices." The police chief visibly tensed, realizing that he wasn't up against just a mother, but a prosecutor willing to use her skills and resources to seek justice for her son. The news of Marcus Williams' arrest, son of the district attorney, spread rapidly across social media and news outlets. The video of police grabbing the teenager and smashing his phone against the asphalt racked up thousands of views within hours. Outrage grew among the public, with heated debates in the comments and activists calling for an immediate investigation. Meanwhile, panic set in at the police station. The officers involved realized the situation had spiraled out of control. The police chief, who had previously tried to minimize the incident, understood he could no longer sweep it under the rug. Determined to see justice, Jennifer Williams harnessed media support and public attention. "I demand a meeting with the police chief and an immediate internal investigation," she declared in an interview with journalists gathered outside the station. "This behavior is unacceptable and violates my son's civil rights and those of every black resident of our city." Public support grew, and activists took to the streets, demanding justice for Marcus and condemning the police's racist actions. A crowd gathered outside the police station, holding signs reading, "Justice for Marcus," and "No racism in law enforcement." Under intense scrutiny, the police finally conceded. The police chief invited Jennifer to a closed meeting in an attempt to defuse the conflict. But Jennifer was not there to compromise. She insisted on the immediate suspension of the officers involved and demanded an apology to her son and the entire black community. During negotiations, the chief tried to defend his officers, arguing they were following standard procedures. However, Jennifer exposed a deeper issue. "This isn't just about this incident, it's about systemic bias and aggression against black citizens. If this happened to my son, it could happen to anyone," she said, addressing the crowd gathered outside. Her words sparked a powerful response. People voiced their support, chanting slogans and calling for justice. Under mounting pressure, the chief agreed to suspend the officers involved in Marcus's arrest, pending a full investigation. Understanding this was just the first step, Jennifer publicly announced her intention to push for police reform. She urged the city to establish an independent committee to investigate cases of police misconduct and promised to fight for transparency and justice in law enforcement. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus stood by his mother, moved by her courage and determination. At that moment, he realized that what had happened to him was more than a personal tragedy. It was a chance to change society and make the world fairer for everyone. After the temporary suspension of the officers involved in Marcus's detention, public demands for justice and reform only intensified. Inspired by the community's support, Jennifer Williams used her legal expertise to advance an initiative to reform the city's police system. She called for an independent investigation and formed a coalition of civil rights activists, community leaders, and human rights advocates. During a meeting with the city administration, Jennifer made a firm demand for reforms. "These officers violated not only my son's rights, but also the rights of every citizen who faces prejudice. I won't allow this incident to be buried in the archives. We will fight to create an oversight committee and implement regular anti-bias training for all police officers." Under tremendous public pressure, the mayor and police chief had no choice but to take her words seriously. They promised to consider Jennifer's proposals and hold an open discussion on reforms. Meanwhile, activists continued their campaign on social media, sharing the video of Marcus's arrest and calling for justice rallies. Weeks into the campaign, the city officially announced the creation of an independent committee to oversee police investigations. The news was met with widespread approval. However, Jennifer saw this as just the beginning. She insisted on a public apology from the police and held a press conference where the police chief made a formal statement, expressing regret over the incident and pledging to prevent similar occurrences in the future. "We understand that trust has been broken, and we are committed to restoring it through honesty and transparency," he said, looking into the cameras. Yet Jennifer did not stop her fight, urging the city authorities to uphold regular accountability and thoroughly address systemic discrimination. At the press conference, Marcus also spoke up. He stood before the microphones, unafraid to talk about the pain and humiliation he had experienced, but also emphasizing the significance of his story as a catalyst for change. "I hope my story helps prevent others from facing unjust treatment. We all deserve to live in a world where we are respected and valued, regardless of our skin color." His words brought applause and cheers from the audience. The press widely covered Marcus and Jennifer's speech, making their story a symbol of the fight for justice, not only in this city but beyond. The public saw that even in the hardest of circumstances, change was possible if people united for a common cause. Months after the incident, Jennifer and Marcus watched as their efforts continued to transform the system. The police implemented new policies, and inspired by the Williamses' example, citizens grew more involved in civic life, demanding transparency. For them, this story ended in victory, but for the city, it marked the beginning of a long journey toward justice and equality.